hear me? So if you can hear us, please type one. Let's yes, okay, cool. People can hear us. This is good. Awesome.
Nice.
That's a lot of ones. Means they can hear us a lot. So the purpose of this is obviously to ask Taylor questions about the asking track or anything else that you feel like asking about, but make it about this track, please. Um, his assistant, Will Beasley, is here to talk about anything related to prep, drum editing, mix prep, anything along those lines. Will is here to answer those questions because he did that all for this track. And just a reminder, if you guys have questions, make sure you put a bracket and a queue, kind of like I am in the chat right now. We're going to get to all your questions if we can. So yeah, so Taylor, hello,
Hello.
hello, back. Yeah, I I can't believe that was a year ago that we did Jason Richardson.
Has it been like exactly a year or just close
It's
to one?
been exactly a year. That was January 2016.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah, I know. Feels like 2 or 3 months ago. It also feels like 10 years ago at the
Time flies when you're having
exact
fun.
same time. Yeah, exactly. I have a question, or I just want to kind of like tell you something that I noticed. People who got this track were
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed by the amount of vocals and
Mm-hmm.
effects and synth. Did that make it harder for you to mix, like having to balance all those elements?
Yeah.
People were pretty intimidated.
Yeah, it was tough. The track that you guys mixed, I actually did a test mix to get the whole record. So that's the first thing I did, and that one was a lot easier. There's some, so imagine like the same thing, but like times two or three. There's definitely some on the record that are like that. That song Under Denver has like three times the amount of vocal slash programming tracks. So that one was like that one took me like 5 tries to nail. But yeah, I mean it was tough. It's definitely hard making because you want stuff to be like huge sounding and you want it to feel right, but you also want to fit all that stuff in there and try to make it so that everyone can hear everything. So yeah, it's definitely um, tough to do.
Don't sometimes those two things work opposite of each other, like getting things to sound huge and also making it so that you can hear everything,
Right. Yeah. Well, usually the
like the
rule
challenge.
is if you want something to sound huge, don't have a ton of layers. So this is the exact opposite.
So quite a work of wizardry to make it sound huge and hear everything. So here's a question from Edgar Salazar. Hi, any hint about how did you get that gigantic snare?
Um, those are really just my drum triggers. I'd have to say, so for the whole record and for that song, I have different like scenes almost for the drums. So like the intro of that song, I had a drum set up with different sets of triggers and room triggers to kind of make it sound huge. And then for the verse, it's kind of a tighter, more drawn back sound. And then for the choruses, it was kind of like a middle of the road sound. So um, for the intro of that, actually, in like 2015, 14, somewhere around there, I took samples in my ex-girlfriend's horse barn. I convinced her to take all the horses out of the barn, and I put a snare drum in there and a laptop and some mics, and it's pretty much like the hugest room samples, and I haven't used them in a while. I think I used them on Periphery 2, and I haven't really used them on anything since. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of bust them out for this. So that's kind of the room sound on the intro of that song after the little
Nice.
drum part.
Did you say 2013?
Yeah, like, or no, I'm sorry, I totally spaced on that. It's probably right before I did Periphery 2, so 2012.
Damn, so it's been a while. You've had those in the vault.
Yeah.
Just goes to show, man, that people really should be trying to make their own samples and uh, utilizing the space they have to try to make it happen and not worry about having $1 million studio or something and
Yeah.
made it in a barn.
Yeah.
So, um, you kind of answered this question, so we'll go on to the next one. Russell Barnett is asking, and by the way, Russell, you should really tune into Nail the Mix because you'll see the answer to this question. But he's wondering, what's something you do differently now versus back a year ago during Jason's album?
Um, I mean, I think the fact that I'm using 3 or 4 different drum sounds, different scenes for different parts and stuff like that. Also, Jason's record is very guitar driven, whereas this record they kind of wanted the vocals to be the focus of what I was mixing. So there's a lot of stuff that's similar in terms of like sounds that I like to go for, but there's also a lot of stuff that's different. Um, Trying to think. Yeah, it's just mainly the guitars aren't the forefront. I mean, Jason had a lot of programming too, but there was the vocals, so it wasn't as hard.
And it's like these are more like really basic riffs that just back up
Yeah.
the arrangement. Um, Maxwell Butterfield's wondering, did you go into the project knowing you would have to do so much reinforcement?
Um, I'm not sure. I think the way we started is they wanted me to use the drums that they had, like the raw drums, and I kind of slowly started sneaking more triggers in there until we completely replaced it, like with my drums. And so I was just kind of like, I had to explain to Ben, I'm like, it's just better this way. You just have to trust me.
And did it take any fighting, or was he like cool?
No, Ben was awesome. He was like the easiest guy to work with. It's funny, like most of the revisions and drafts and changes that I made were really just me. I would just drive in the car and make my own notes, and Ben was pretty much cool with like the first or second version of every song.
That always makes life easier.
Yeah, it makes a record better because it's like I feel like if he's not giving me notes, then I can give myself notes and be tough on it and push for things that bands wouldn't normally ask for.
Yeah, exactly. So, and okay, so this question also, Martin, you should definitely watch the live stream because you'll see the answer to this in action. But anyways, the question is, how do you balance the guitars and synth without fighting the vocals with the drums
How do I balance guitars and synth without fighting vocals for the drums?
or drums
Oh,
without
or
fighting
drums.
vocals or drums? Yeah.
Um, it's tough. I mean, usually like I can do this more on the actual Nail the Mix, but usually I get the vocals up front and where I want, and then I kind of bring in the layers and try to see, how loud I can get something without it walking all over it. But a lot of times I'm EQing the synths so that I can hear them kind of not compete in a certain area. Like let's say Danny's voice is really mid forward, and let's say it's somewhere between 1K to like 5K or something. I might duck a synth that's like in that area, in that uh, frequency area, so that there's room for his voice to kind of be in the front and it just sits in the back. And sometimes it's one of those things where you can't necessarily get every layer to the point where you could hear it perfectly clear, but if you mute it, it's gone. You know what I mean? It's more of like a feel
Mhm.
thing. And then in terms of the guitars, those are mainly just like keep those behind everything. Like they wanted the guitars kind of in the back, not as loud as what I would normally do. So when you have the guitars in the back, it's kind of easier to let everything else go forward. And there's automation on everything. Like if there's a heavier part where the guitars are kind of needed, I'll bring them forward. But if we're in a chorus, then obviously the guitars are just kind of barely in there, you know?
Hmm. All right, so here's one from Ben Duncan. Hey, Taylor, do you have any especially slick tricks for eliminating hi-hat bleed after tracking?
That's actually a question for Will.
Ah, okay. Well, actually, the
Eliminating.
next two,
Okay, here. Let me give it to
the
him.
next two are for Will. Hey,
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 Will.
Will.
What's going on?
Um, you know, hanging out, doing this Q&A. Thanks for being here, by the way.
Yeah.
Everyone who just came in, this is Will Beasley, Taylor's assistant. He did all the drum editing, samples, all that stuff. So Taylor said that this is a question for you. So do you have any especially slick tricks for eliminating hi-hat bleed after tracking?
So to eliminate hi-hat bleed, I mean, mostly it comes from, I know you use like, Taylor uses like the MIC DSP gate, and that's really good with eliminating any hi-hat bleed. And then, but also, I mean, layering in the triggers that we do, like we do multi-sample triggers for pretty much all the drums, and just layering those in and kind of turning down the real snare track down, that really helps with the bleed.
Also tell him how you can clip gain if there's like a peak or something that still gets through the gate.
Yeah, and you can clip gain anything that gets through the gate so that it all is nice and smooth.
Yeah, seems like a good solution. Okay, so Christopher Hummel's wondering, what kind of workflow do you use for drum samples? Are you just using slate trigger, or are you hand placing everything?
So we do slate trigger for the multi samples, and then we also layer like one shots that aren't multi sampled. They're just hard hits, and just layer those basically pasting. And with this, I usually make the trigger points and like with beat detective cutting the each hit. But this one they gave us MIDI trigger points, so we already had that, so that was easy.
That makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, way easier.
Edgar Salazar is wondering, this is for you as well. Can you share your editing process to make the ghost notes on the snare pop?
So for ghost notes, I do it two different ways. It kind of depends on if it's like a super heavy ghost note part, or I mean if there's just like a couple little parts. But honestly, if there's not a ton of ghost notes, I'll just sometimes just paste like a few different ghost note hits, like kind of multi-sample, but just pasting. And then he has them on like its own track, and he can turn those up or down as he wants. Or in trigger, the way that I make the multi-sample triggers, it so when it's going to trigger, I put like a little tiny automation for each hit, and so then it kind of almost turns it into MIDI in a way, like with the velocities. So you can control from like turning up that little hit up or down is like how hard you want it to hit trigger. So that
Hmm.
really helps with like getting the like if there's ghost notes and they're not coming up as loud as I want in trigger, I can just turn up that automation point.
Which is sick.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it
great.
just
All
makes
right,
everything sound
so
really real.
cool. Thank you. Okay, so this next question is for Taylor, so
All
you could
right,
switch
this one's
back
for
the
you.
headphone.
I have to switch it.
You back?
Yep.
There you are. All right, cool. All right, here's one from Charlie Williamson, which says, how did you manage to get a good balance between making the song sound like a Taylor song while still sounding like an Asking Alexandria song?
Hmm. I don't really know. I don't really know if there's an answer to that because I don't. It's weird. I don't really think that stuff sounds like a Taylor thing. Like I'll listen to my stuff and I'll say like, oh, this kind of went for the big guitar sound with like a kind of thud snare that doesn't have a ton of crack but has a lot of punch that you feel in your chest, or this mix is more kind of like the crack snare where it's less body and more snap to it. Um, so in my head, I'm not really thinking Taylor. I mean, I know the way I like to hear things, but I think when I hear a song, I think about what has influenced me that's closest to that style of music and what my favorite mixes are in that genre, and then I kind of try to go for or beat that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's a Taylor. It's going to sound like you because it's you. You know, you're going to make moves
Right.
and you hear things the way that you hear them. So you're going to make
And
your
I think
moves based on
I
that.
don't really know what an Asking Alexandria thing is because I didn't really listen to the band before this. I had maybe heard them for like 20 seconds at one point, but and the same thing when I did I See Stars, I didn't listen to them or Veil of Maya. So a lot of those bands I didn't already listen to or know what their sound was. So if I still carried them the way that they needed to be carried, then that's awesome, you know.
Great. So Martin Tomasic is wondering, what's your DI signal chain? The DI guitars sound really sick. Thanks.
Yeah, so I've been messing around with a bunch of stuff. I used to use some metal amp room here and there, but lately I've just been using the plugin I made with Jason. I mean, they pretty much nailed that sound, and it's really good for what I want to do. And then for fun, I tried adding in Ben's plugin because he joked about it with me and said like, you know, I have one too. You should try mine. So I downloaded it, put it on, and I ran it parallel. And for some crazy reason, they decided that they were both in phase, and I just brought it up a little bit, and it really kind of made a cool sound when you blend both of them. I'm actually mixing a band named Era right now, and
Oh, I
did
know who they
this.
are.
We did a similar thing with guitars, but way more in your face. So when that comes out, people will be able to like really hear what that does. And I'm super stoked the way those two plugins play with each other. It's like one super deep and has a lot of bass and oomph and low end, and then the Ben Bruce one has like a ton of like sparkling top end, and when you put them both together you kind of get this like perfect thing where you get insane note definition but it's like still kind of huge sounding, you know.
Hey, you love blending amps. I remember from the Jason session that that was one of the big things, getting those three amps to work together, getting the phase to line up with the
Yeah,
UAD phase plugin. Yeah.
yeah, the reason I like doing that is because so like I view a guitar tone as like just these jagged things. That's distortion. And so to me blending an amp, you have one that's like this, and then you have one that's like this, and then you have one that's like this. And the more you layer those, the closer you're getting your amp to sound like a synth or something, where it's just smoother and all those harsh peaks go away, and it just gets like nicer to me. You know, that's my philosophy.
You do it great. So here's one from Jake Clark. Do your EQs change when working with guitars like these and drop G sharp rather than standard or even D standard? Do you do anything differently?
Probably. I don't think I do it because I'm thinking about doing it. I probably just hear it and quickly go with it. Usually when I mix really fast and I don't think. Like, so I'm not like, oh, this guitar is in this tuning. I didn't even know what tuning any of the songs were in, but I think if I just hear something, I'll open it real quick and kind of move it around, get it to work with the song, and then quickly move on to something else. But the short answer is yeah, probably.
So, how long does it normally take you to get your first mix done?
Well, because of him, it's actually really fast. So what we'll do is I'll get the song, listen to it, figure out like what have I mixed that could be a cool starting point, and then he essentially just goes in, preps it to be like that mix and look like that mix, and then from there I start and get all the levels and then tweak to make it like its own unique thing. But I'm a big fan of having a good base point to start from where things already feel great and sound great, and they can only get better, you know?
Why reinvent the wheel every time if you don't need to?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Here's one from Kyriakos Erodotou, which is mixing wise, what do you think makes a song sound like a record rather than a good sounding slash mixed song?
So my philosophy is this. I think in mixing there's two sides to it. There's like you can have things be very distorted and kind of have a lot of energy and sound a little raw or rough. And then you can have things that are very clean and sterile and boring. And I think mixing, for me, I want to be right in the middle. How can I get the tracks themselves to sound a little bit roughed up and a little bit kind of distorted and warm and feel good, and then be EQ'd clean and you still have the separation. So a lot of times I'll hear a recording that's that doesn't have that feel, that's like very sterile or very plain or boring sounding. And to me, it's just that balance of knowing which things you have to get clean and which things you have to kind of rough up, but still EQ in a good way to where people can feel it the way it's supposed to be felt, but hear it the way it's supposed to be heard, you know?
Great answer here. And actually, this next question kind of, kind of follows this one nicely. It's from Evan Kral, and he's asking, what did you primarily use to get the mix so saturated sounding, especially the snare drum? It sounds distorted in a very musical way.
Right, yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Um, it's funny, there's actually two answers to this. So the first thing is I normally master my music, and this is the first record in a while that I didn't master. We had Ted Jensen master it, and I think he mastered it a little bit hot, which is cool. I mean, I do that anyway, but um, I think some of it has to do with him. And for me, with the snare thing, I would just say you have to watch the nail of the mix. It's easier to just show rather than explain because there's like 7 different plug-in chains and yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
gnarly.
So Carlos Sarmiento is wondering, hey Taylor, thanks for being here. I was wondering if you're using more clipping in your workflow now, like maybe clipping your preamps or converters or in the box clipping.
Yeah, I've always clipped stuff, but I'm not like I never went into recording saying like I'm gonna use clipping or this is clipping. I think it just happened. Um, I mean, with the Neve preamps and stuff like that, like I've always been a fan of that and done that intentionally, but like when you look at my converters on the way in, if I'm tracking drums or whatever, my philosophy would always be like, if it sounds good, then I don't care. Like somebody would be like, oh, hey, that's hitting the red. I'm like, it doesn't matter to me, you know? So when I mix, it's kind of the same way. I'm not really looking at the track to see if it's clipping. If I can hear it and it's bad, then that's one thing. You know, I'll take that from there. But yeah, I think it's just a result of me never caring about that and always trying to trust my ears, you know?
hmm Here's one from Evan Vanna, which is if you could give any advice to yourself in the early days of your career, what would it be?
Work less hard, don't do as much, don't. It's weird though because it's like if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be where I am now, but also it kind of the more you do in the beginning and the harder you work in the beginning, you tend to slow down when, you know, there's like 9 years later or something like that. Like you kind of I call it mental capacity. You lose your capacity for things. So even though you were only in for 5 hours, you might be like completely shot and uncreative because I personally just think I did so much in the beginning to where I come in now and I get worn out faster and stuff like that. But that being said, I'm incredibly efficient, so I believe in 1 hour I can get done probably what I would have done back then in 4 hours. So there's always that.
So maybe you'd tell yourself back then to get more efficient so that
Yeah,
you'd work less hours and burn out less.
yeah, exactly.
So Daniel Kuzmenko is wondering, any new compressor plugins you've been digging lately?
I feel like I got some new ones. I got the black box. It's like a tube compressor, or I don't even know if you would call it a compressor. It's just like a tube distortion box, made by Brainworks. That's pretty cool. Um, it's one of those things where like you put it on something and you really like what it does, and then you put it in the mix with that thing, and then you're like not so sure. Um, so I'm still kind of working with it and seeing what's going to happen with it. And then another plugin that I started using that isn't new, but that I just randomly bought is the TubeTech CL1B, which is kind of like a pop vocal compressor. And I've been using that for my personal stuff for my own band, Heavy Eye. So that one's really cool if you want to get a vocal that's kind of super exciting and in your face in like a pop kind of way.
Awesome. Sander Saddam is wondering, is there any way of purchasing the drum samples used on this? Mainly thinking about the huge snare.
I actually never sold those barn samples. I don't think maybe to a couple of my close friends or something like that. But yeah, well, I will say if there is going to be a way to do it, it's probably going to be through Drumforge or Joey. We have a lot of stuff in the works, so I'm gonna stick with that because I really like the software. He came here and showed me how it ran and how we're gonna be able to use it and how the cymbals actually sound good. Because that's my problem with a lot of the other samplers is I really don't like the way the cymbals sound or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think there will be a chance at some point.
Nice. So Oliver Shlitio is wondering, how did you take the jump from being a dude in a bedroom to being the Taylor Larson? Did an opportunity for a big record happen to fall at the right time, or did you just grind it out the whole way?
Um, well, I always was Taylor Larson. I don't think I've ever been a dude in a bedroom because I didn't ever take it that way. So like a lot of people now, like people in like the gent genre or whatever, they all do the bedroom producer thing and stuff like that. But for me, it was really important to not go that way. The people that I kind of learned from or grew up around or went to record with, I tried to emulate that as much as I could. So within like the first few years, I made it a point to like put all my money towards gear and get Pro Tools and immediately start renting a space, even though I didn't know how I was gonna afford rent for it. But I always wanted to do things in a professional sense and kind of always record real drums and stuff like that. That's why I'm not good at like programming drums or doing stuff like that because that's not where I come from. I made it a point to not come from that place.
Here's one from Hans Marius Overland, which is there a clap or a gunshot or something being triggered in the drums on the verses? My ears have been hearing some effects that I just couldn't find in the tracks.
Um, I think so. So yeah, two answers to this. One, if it is, then it might be a sample that um, I'm not sure that the producer wants me to share with people. But
Hmm.
I think it's actually just a reverb being automated on and off is what's going on.
Sounds like it. Okay, so this question's for Will, actually.
Okay.
Hey, Will.
Hey, Will.
All right, I think I got you now.
Cool. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, awesome. Richard Hunterman is asking, do you edit the dynamics of the MIDI created by Trigger?
So no, not usually. Usually I like how I said before, where I basically like turn the volume down the whole track and then put the little automations on each of the hits that goes to trigger. With that, usually I just make sure that the input is doing it to where like it's hitting the actual dynamics of what the drummer would have played. I mean, occasionally there will be like if the drummer's not super consistent, then I can like automate, some of them that aren't hitting as hard or light, but usually I don't really mess with that.
Okay, and here's another question from Stuart Simon. And he's saying, so the snare samples were house made. How many different samples did you blend? And how important was the bottom mic for the sound? I guess the bottom mic question would be for Taylor, but you know how many samples blended.
How many samples there? Well, with the one shots, we have like there's like maybe 8 snare samples or so. I don't know how many like you actually ended up using because I'll give him like
He wants to give me options.
yeah, I'll literally give him every sample that we have for kick and snare, and then just going through, he can just pick and choose like which ones to take out. It's like with I can't remember the name of the song, but we were talking about it earlier, where there's like different drum sounds and like the verse and the chorus and stuff.
Under Denver?
I
Is it
think
that
so.
one?
But like that's like another thing, giving him all the options. Like he kind of has the freedom to mess with each part, like put different triggers in a certain part that he wants. So I mean, I guess to answer the question, there is a ton of samples.
I think we just have to specify that I'm not using all of those at one time,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they're
it's
not
not
very
all at
loud
one
because
time,
people
but
will
I
freak
give him
out.
a ton.
Yeah, I mean, talk about talk about possible phasing issues to have that many samples running at once.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so okay, so this next question is for Taylor.
All right, see you.
Me?
Cool. Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Awesome. Okay, here's one from Jake Clark. For a college student going to school for music production, what would you recommend doing after getting my degree to get my foot in the door of the industry after graduation?
Say that again, one more time.
Okay, for a college student going to school for music production, what would you recommend doing to get my foot in the door of the industry after graduation?
Don't go to school, drop out. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, mainly what it's tough. I can't really tell you how to get in the industry. I can tell you how to get good at what you want to do. I can tell you how to like, you know, figure out what makes you you, but industry it's kind of like a I want to say it's somewhat of a luck thing, but it's also kind of like if you get the chance to work with someone who's in a band that you know people are going to hear, you do it for free when you're starting out, you know. I did a record for a band called Sky Eats Airplane, which they're not big anymore, but at that point they were doing pretty decent, and it was the first time I worked with a record label, and I did it practically free. I mean, they didn't really pay me much, and I learned a lot from it, and that's kind of how I got my foot in the door, and then I got other records based off of the fact that I did that record. So um, that helps. I mean, living near a band helps. I've recorded, like, I want to say I did Periphery because Misha would always come over and hang out, and we would always mess with stuff, mess with drum tones, mess with guitar tones, and eventually he's like, well, I want to do my next record here. Like, I've seen you improve a lot, and you're getting really good, and I think you can, you know, give us what we need, and we want to have real drums and do it kind of the real way and not, you know, program all that stuff. So I think it just
Hmm.
helps to like either know people and do it for free or just do it for free to begin with.
Great answer. Cal Gillum is wondering, hey Taylor, was the intro to Into the Fire natural drums and when the vocals come in, then it's samples,
The intro, as in like the Aerosmith sounding part, or
Yeah,
the
I think
actual
so.
down down the big part?
No, oh, good question. I think he means the Aerosmith sounding part.
No, there's triggers in that. It's actually a funny story. Um, I think I'm gonna wait to tell it on Nail the Mix though. But yeah, there's a funny story behind that intro part. You know it, right?
I don't.
What we did.
No, I don't.
You haven't seen it?
I just saw that it's all bounced into one thing, but
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know what she did.
Okay. Yeah, there's a funny story behind that that we'll get to at Nail the Mix.
Awesome. Um, so Tyler, your question is going to be answered in the mix, so I'm going to skip it right now. Um, Vale Black's wondering, and I'm guessing you're not going to know the answer to this, but how many songs roughly have you mixed throughout your career? A lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, somebody put it all on Wikipedia, so I mean, that's probably not all, but that's at least records I've done, so you could go count on there, and I actually believe those to be, professionally done or out in the world. But I mean, if you're counting like all the stuff I did when I first started and little one-off things, I have no idea. Couldn't even tell you.
Awesome. Um, all right. So Brett Bailey is wondering, do you use any plugins for room design on your drum samples? And if so, how do you personally go about balancing it out with the live mix?
What do you mean room design, like reverb?
Yeah, I don't know. Brett Bailey, if you're still on, could you please clarify your question? And I'll move on to another one. Edgar Salazar says, this album is loud. I know you didn't do the mastering, but was your mix already really loud before mastering?
No. Um, it was like I would say maybe some of the snare hits would kind of peak every now and then, which doesn't matter at all. But on the fader where it's going consistent, I mean, there's a bit of headroom. My guess is he probably turned it up, I don't know, 5 dB or something, 4 or 5 dB, 6 dB. So I sent it to
Hmm.
him with space, but I just think it got loud.
All right. Um, Istvan Posta is wondering what DI boxes and preamps do you like for recording DI guitars?
I think I've learned now that it doesn't matter so much because when you like a guitar pickup is an old design anyway. So it's like if you think about it, like you're not really getting up into like 18K clarity or like anything crazy like that. And then when you put an amp in cab sim, I mean cabs don't go up that far anyway either. Like if you look at it on, a frequency chart or whatever, you see that it just kind of drops off. So I've kind of changed my philosophy on that. I mean, I'll use whatever. I don't care. I don't think it's going to make a difference for the song or the people hearing it. That being said, you just want to get something clean and nice. I mean, you can use a radial into a preamp or go into your interface if you have like an interface. For me, I have these like really clean preamps that somebody like handmade, and I was using the radial into that just to have it be a clean, clear signal.
Great. Um, this question is for Will.
Okay.
You can you hear me?
If I can hear now.
Okay, awesome. Okay, this one's from Andy Green. How did you take care of the mic bleed in the toms?
Um, the way they sent it to us, the toms were they already had the bleed cut out, I believe. And then also, I mean, I guess the other way. I don't even know if you used any tom triggers on that. I think it's just the live toms, right?
Yeah, we just use the real toms on that one.
Yeah, the way they sent it to us, they were already cut out. But what I would normally do is just so I would make a playlist and then copy the normal tom track down to the playlist, and then clip gain down maybe 18 or so dB on the main one, and then just tab to transient where each tom hit is, and take the normal volume one and pull it up onto the track that's clip gain down, and then just fade it from the normal volume down to the clip gain lower one. So then it just like basically is like a manual gate.
There's a little bit of bleed, but not too much.
Yeah.
Great answer. Okay, this next one's for Taylor.
Cool. Sure, yeah.
Also, I will add to that that's exactly what Matt had his engineer do, because I taught Matt how to record. So
Awesome.
yeah.
All right, here's one from Ricardo Sousa, which is, you said that this mix wasn't the one that got you the job. What more or less are the differences between the original mix and the one that made it to the album?
Man, that is tough. Uh, I honestly couldn't tell you. There's a lot of stuff. Drums, like I said, how we were getting more and more into using the triggers of my stuff and weird things that I had made. And I think the guitars changed quite a bit. The bass changed. Pretty much everything changed. I would just, I would take it in the car and then be tough on myself and say, what can I get better? What can I get better? What can I get better? And then I would send it to Ben, and he'd just be like, holy shit, like this is getting insane. Like, this is awesome. Can we make the rest of the songs like this? And I'd be like, yep, and focus on doing that. But yeah, it is kind of funny because the initial mix was kind of different.
All right, Charles Bryan is wondering, I'm a fan of your work. I'm always impressed about how you control your low end. It would be great if you could give a brief explanation about your philosophy about low end.
So I see a lot of people, and they like to like bus compressor, for example, they like to use filters so that it lets the low end through. You know what I mean? Like a sidechain filter or whatever. So it's like the compressor ignores everything below 100 hertz or whatever. I actually think that's a terrible idea, because when you do that, you're kind of pinching the top end and you're letting the low end through without controlling it, so it's kind of moving around. And to me, that sounds really inconsistent and just not good. So I just compress the whole thing as one, maybe hit it less hard so it doesn't pump as much, and get the whole thing to feel super consistent. And then I'll add the low end back after the compressor to kind of give you that sense of it's always feeling big. You just bring in a filter 1 dB, like 70 hertz on a Bell or something, on like a Massenburg EQ. I think that's what I used on Asking. And to me, what that does is it keeps the song feeling like it's consistent, and it never feels dynamic in a bad way where you feel things get louder or more quiet, and you still have that perception of it being really big sounding.
Great. Um, Alan Sessa is wondering, what was the signal chain for the vocal recording? They sound very compressed, but I find them really clear. Do you know what mic was used for that recording?
Yeah, so Matt has a Neumann FET 47, which is pretty cool. I think it's a little mid forward. And then there's some parts where I think, if I'm not mistaken, they went to Jonathan Davis's studio and used like a Sony C800, which is what I use. I really love that mic. And I think it's kind of a mix of everything. It's, see if you guys can listen and see where there's different mics, because I know there are multiple mics in different songs. That's what Matt has told me. So um, I don't think the vocals were compressed very hard on the way in. And if Matt did what I taught him, then he just used a Neve and an 1176 on the way in. I did a ton of vocal processing, like a lot of plugins and a vocal bus. This is the first time that I mixed into a vocal bus and went even harder with it. So maybe that's what you're hearing.
Okay, awesome. Um, let's see here. Lost my place. Okay, Charles Bryan is wondering, what is the first thing you do when you're starting a mix? Is there a list of things you go through before you start reaching for EQs and compressors?
First thing I do is give it to that man next to me. And then yeah, I pretty much explain that like he preps it. You know, I listen first. I just listen to the song. I like to have a rough mix sent to me, just a rough MP3, so I can hear it and think, what can I do with this? And then I'll just tell him like, hey, let's pull the session or pull the data from this song that I mixed, and we'll start there. And you know, he gives me all the options on the triggers or whatever it may be. Um, and then I take it from there and see what I can turn it into. That's if we're sent something. If I'm recording myself, then I kind of do it differently. I'll, you know, get the drum tone and kind of build off of that on the fly, you know.
Mm-hmm. All right. Rafael Mario Moravito is wondering, what were your studies in the past years? Did you start working right away or did you follow other mix engineers? I guess when you were starting up.
Um, yeah, I think I just I started. I always had people that I looked up to that I wanted to get influence from. So like for me, you know, I wanted to go for the absolute top, and I always thought that CLA was kind of the best. So I've always kind of taken influence from him, and one thing that I love about him is that I'll listen to a mix and I'll love it and I'll say this is such a good mix, and I'm like, this one can't be CLA, like this has to be somebody else. It doesn't even sound like CLA. And I'll look in the notes and sure enough it's CLA, and I'm just like, wow, that's really cool. So I've always kind of looked up to him, and if I take influence from anybody, it's him. Um, I really like Eric Valentine's kick drum sound, so I've kind of drawn influence from that. I just take elements of things that I really like that, you know, I think the people that are doing this at the highest level do, and I try to make that my own or beat that, you know, try to do my version, but how can I improve it or make it even better? So that's usually what I do, and it's funny because um, I think there's like asking could have had CLA mix this, and somebody sent me a message, and they were just like, "This sounds like CLA on steroids." So I sent it to Ben, and I was like, "There you go, man. You got CLA on steroids."
Nice. That's not a bad thing, CLA on steroids.
Yeah.
Uh, Michael Kolstorff says, awesome work. There's a few empty tracks in the vocal session. Are those just empty tracks?
Probably. I mean, is it the type of thing where there's something on one side and nothing on the other? Because pretty much what I gave you guys is what I got. I just exported. You know, I would just highlight everything, consolidate it if it wasn't, and then export it out. So that's my guess.
Yeah. All right. Dominic Astor's wondering, the MP3 mix we got, is that your mix or the mastered version? It is going over 0, and I somehow remember you said it is a trick Ted Jensen uses.
I did not master that. I'm pretty sure Ted Jensen did that. There is a version I mastered. I think the YouTube video of Only Into the Fire I mastered, but Where Did It Go and everything else was Ted Jensen. But I think the actual version is Ted Jensen.
Awesome. So Blaine Gordon's wondering, I'm recently partnering with a friend studio, giving me free reign to record live drums for the first time. What advice do you guys have for me diving into live drums with good outboard gear, etc.? Hey, let me just say real quick, that, Blaine, you should get our upcoming drum course called Ultimate Drum Production that we're releasing next month, where we go through all of this in exhaustive detail. So just go to ultimatedrumproduction.com/pre-order or /notify, depending on if you want to go ahead and order it or get notified when it's released. And I will let Taylor answer now.
Yeah, honestly, there's going to be more on there than what I do. Like I have, I have my setup that I've had set up forever. So like for me, everything's already there. Like I just move the mics up; they're already dialed in, and I just go. But um, the short answer is just experiment, tune, find somebody who plays well, find the area in the room that sounds good. Um, Try different preamps, find out what you like. One thing that's really cool is like I can tell you what I like, but that's what makes me me. And if you can find something different that you like and it's good, then that's really cool because that makes you different than everybody else or just me. So I always like hearing unique, weird, different things.
Mm-hmm. All right, and last question, and this is from Rafael Maria Morabito. Um, I don't know if this has already been asked, but what kind of monitors do you use?
I use Amphion's.
Oh, I thought you got rid of those, or was it the power amp you switched?
I switched to a solid state power amp just because it was easier, and then I went from the big 218s back to my old 118s because so like I could get the same mix on both, but I get the vocals better on the 118, so I just switched back. I didn't care.
All right, great. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for doing this. Will, thank you for being here.
Sure.
Can't
He
wait
just
to
thanked
see
you.
you, and yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can't wait to hang out in 2 weeks and do the live mix and hang out.
It's gonna be awesome. Stoked.
Yeah, it will. Well, thanks for doing this, and we'll see you next time, guys.
All right. See ya.
Bye bye.